Hi, morning. Welcome to today's webinar on freelancing in the new normal. This is organized by the Law Society Pro Bono Services Office in collaboration with the National Trades Union Congress. My name is Liansheng. I'm your moderator for today. We have some housekeeping matters before we get started. Please do not take screenshots or share the materials without the permission of the organizers. There are some materials which are relevant for today's talk. They can be downloaded from the handouts panel on your screen. If you're using a mobile phone, this is on the right side, top right-hand corner of your screen. If you're using a computer, the icons are in the panel on your right. Download these materials before the end of the talk. Feel free to ask any questions during the webinar as well. You can type them into the questions pane and click send. Your questions will only be seen by the moderator and the panelists. We'll do our best to address them during the talk or at the end of the talk. Please note that this discussion, of course, is not intended to substitute any professional legal advice that you should seek if you have legal queries. You should consult a lawyer if you have specific legal questions to ask. All right, with that done, let's get straight into the discussion. I'm very excited for today's webinar because freelancers' rights has always been something that I'm very passionate about. Today's webinar is also designed to provide very practical legal solutions to freelancers encountering issues which have been surfaced to us in recent months. For today's webinar, I'm very honored to have two very distinguished guests with us, two distinguished panelists. Patrick is the Assistant Secretary General of NTUC and the Director of NTUC's Legal Services and Strategy Division. And we have Francis as well. Francis is the Head of International Arbitration and Head of Private Client Advisory Practice at Elias Partnership. Francis serves as a mediator at the Singapore Mediation Centre and the Singapore International Mediation Centre. Patrick and Francis, morning. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, so today's webinar will essentially be a panel discussion of some case scenarios which we have extracted from queries that were posed to us prior to today's webinar. I will invite the panelists to discuss how they can assist the freelancer in question. After the discussion of these case scenarios, the panelists will also share with us some resources as well as some information to take note of, especially for freelancers in the new normal these days. We will close off the webinar with a Q&A session, and we will answer the queries that you have during the Q&A session as well. So please feel free to ask any question during the webinar. And with that, let's start today's webinar. So today's webinar really deals with a protagonist in mind. We have a freelancer. We call her Jasmine. Jasmine is a multi-hyphenate. She is a freelance yoga instructor, illustrator, performer. She also provides ad hoc food delivery services, typically covering most of the freelancer services that we will be talking about today. So maybe we start with the basics. Francis, what is a freelancer, or who is a freelancer?
Wow. Okay. Let's get right down to it. Whether you're a food delivery man or woman, whether you're in the creative industry or whether you're a PMET, if you call yourself a freelancer, part of the gig economy, that's the in thing these days, you are a business owner. You are not an employee. So the company employing you has no obligations to take care of you. You are in business for yourself. You are responsible for yourself. What does that entail? You are responsible for your rights. You must invest in yourself, and you must plan for your future. Patrick will tell us more about investing in yourself and planning for your future. Let me drill down into the first point. What are you responsible for? Your rights. As a freelancer, your rights are contained in your contract. If it's not in writing, it's probably not in existence. All right? You can't say by right in law or whatever. It has to be in writing. And then if you signed the contract, have you read it? Most people don't know what they are signing. And they don't know that they have given up their rights, that the other party has got fine print, and then at the end they complain and say, oh, I got taken advantage of. You must take responsibility. But what must you focus on? Your contract should talk about the scope of your responsibility. What are you going to do? What must you do? Who is responsible to get the job done? For example, if you're going to be providing a service in a location, you must have it clear that the other party must give you access to the location by a certain date so that you can do your job. If not, it is not clear. Then you want to get paid for your services. Many of you don't know what value to put on your services. Go and find out from industry benchmarks, value your services. Then talk about the deductions or allowable payments that are going to be made out of the sums that you receive. So for example, if you are hiring a car for driving, are they going to deduct costs of repairs and costs of maintenance for the car? That will affect the price that you can charge. Then you talk about time frame for your services and variation of your rights, and then dispute resolution. Okay, so these are things that you need to look out for in your contract. But now over to Patrick to talk about investing in yourself and your future.
Yeah, thanks, Francis, for that. Yes, I'll talk a bit about some of the more practical handles as well, especially if you are a freelancer. I think in Singapore, the word or the term freelancer is used quite loosely. Yeah, because there are many different, same term, but used in different ways. For example, in the legal context, they call them people who are independent contractors, or sometimes they use the word contract for service, vis-a-vis an employment relationship as a contract of service. Sometimes some parts of the world call them contingent workers, workers of the informal economy. So all these terms are loosely used, and sometimes even self-employed, as what Francis alluded to earlier, that each and every one of you are business owners, whether whichever gig you do, with whichever service you provide or undertake or to do for the client or the buyer of your service. So take note, these are some of the commonly used terms across the globe. Yeah, because freelancing is getting very, very big, not just in Singapore, but across the world. Today, as we are talking, we have something like about 200,000 of us in this freelance and self-employed space. Well, Ministry of Manpower calls it own account workers. So there you are, another term that they use to confuse all of us. But otherwise, these are all terms which allude to the fact that you're the boss. You decide what you're supposed to do and want to do and want to provide, as what Francis alluded to. And I can't emphasize more some of the other aspects, particularly if you are a freelancer, besides reading the terms and conditions. I know some of you tuning in are doing food delivery. Some of you are doing private hire vehicle driving, as well as some of you who are in the creative sector. Some are sports coaches. Many of friends from the labor movement here tuning in as well. So I know your various concerns. In fact, today's webinar is a culmination of some of the sharings and some of the questions you all have posed. So I thought to put in context, besides the legal rights and privileges which Francis alluded to, there are other things that, well, 4 other points which I thought all of us as freelancers should look out for. I think the very first thing is look out for your health and safety. As you know, there may be contingencies or exigencies happening. Yeah, you never know what's happened. You look at the last 15 months is testimony to the fact that anything can happen anytime, anywhere. So I think very, very important, look after your health. I mean, besides staying mentally and physically and healthy, I think also look out for the health insurance bits. Well, we have MediShield, for example, which helps inpatient kind of treatment. But how about outpatient treatment? Yes, you hear about the CHAS card and other kind of subsidies that are provided. So take note of that. If you don't qualify for some of these outpatient care, for example, just like many employees in organizations do. So there are actually products available across insurance companies and various providers to help you pick the tab.
or even you should set aside some monies to bear that contingency. So that's health. Second very important thing which Francis had kind of like touched on would be the safety bits. We read in newspapers, you've seen on social media some of these live feeds and videos where some of our food delivery champions as well as private hire vehicle drivers get into accidents. And lo and behold, they realized actually the company that they rented the vehicle from or were doing the service for did not buy insurance for them or did not cover that particular kind of scenario or situation. So very, very important, you know what your trade you are in, what you're doing, know the risk, and therefore insure yourself. In fact, the Labour Movement has partnered with our NTUC Income to provide some sort of insurance schemes for work injury. For some of you who are in a freelance arrangements, we have provided some of the info as handouts. So the support schemes and stuff are there for you to take a look and also to find out more. But besides health, besides safety, I think the other one is also retirement adequacy. We are quite concerned because we are seeing many more people into freelance arrangements. Remember, in the freelance arrangements, unlike in employment relationship, there is no CPF contribution from an employer. Likewise, also, you're not really mandated to contribute to your CPF, minus the fact that if you earn exceeding a certain sum of money annually, you're required to make some mandatory MediSave contributions, well, simply to pay for your premiums for MediShield. So take note of that. Retirement adequacy is important. In fact, I do come across quite a number of union members, even residents and friends who ask, especially, they are on a freelance arrangements, and suddenly they decide to settle down, get married, buy a house, but when they need to buy a residence and they need to take a loan, they realize, oh, actually I don't have CPF and I may not have sufficient savings, and if you don't show proof of income, even financial institutions may not give you the relevant mortgage and loans to be able for you to purchase a property or even embark on buying a vehicle, etc. So that's the third part. Looking at retirement adequacy as well as your livelihood and your life. And finally, a very, very, very important thing, I think, unlike companies where they have big HR departments and learning and development, training development functions, you are your own so-called small business owner, and you are accountable to yourself. So very, very important to not just in a traditional sense of investment, but really invest in yourself. Very, very important, because with COVID-19, you can see even very highly skilled jobs in highly skilled crafts are also affected. And it's very uncertain, very uneven as we look at the recovery that's going to happen. So very, very important to invest in some form of skills. I know some of you are very, very deep skilled in your respective freelance space or whichever trade or occupation you're doing. But it's good to insure yourself or invest and insure yourself in a second skill, so that you are able to pivot, especially downtime, when that particular service or gig that you're providing loses or drops in demand, so you can pivot. I think very, very important. That's what we have seen in the last 15 months.
Thank you, Francis and Patrick. Those are very useful tips. I think the idea of protecting yourself legally through looking at your contractual terms in written form, and then the practical tips of protecting your interest because you're a self-employed person, those are very useful tips. Actually, they also interact together, right? Because in thinking about caring for yourself, the insurance you have to buy, the CPF contribution, it also goes back to the question that Francis said, how do I price myself? Are these expenses supposed to be factored into my services that I'm providing? So these are things I think the freelancers should also quite think about as well. Yeah. So let's move on. Because we have quite a number of case scenarios that we want to talk about, especially in the new normal. And of course, like what Patrick said, during the COVID-19 situation, many of the freelancers have to pivot because their specialized skills may be impacted due to the situation. So it happened for this hypothetical freelancer that we have as well. So she's a freelance freelancer doing yoga yoga classes. She's also a delivery rider. And Patrick, I understand that you wanted to share something about the national delivery champions.
Yes,
you mentioned
that's fine. Yeah, Liansheng, I did maybe just do a short advert. In fact, we have provided some of the notes in a part of the handouts pages. So some of you who are tuning in, you can actually download those PDF copies under the support schemes and associations available. In fact, the labor movement in the last couple of years, looking at the challenges that freelancers face, have formed several associations, from private hire vehicle riders to National Instructors and Coaches Association, including many of like the protagonist Jasmine in sports coaching arrangements, and as well as the national delivery champions, because of the sudden surge in demand in food delivery. Many of us are using that, so we have also formed an association for that, as well as for the creative sector. And as you can see, this sector has faced exacting challenges and demands from different aspects. Yeah, and therefore we have formed these associations to cater to the needs.
And it helps to band people together so that their needs are taken care of collectively, and can there be some economies of scale as well, right, Patrick?
That's right. Yeah, I know all three of us are quite passionate about this space, and and the best is to band together and try to overcome some of these issues and challenges, and that's why, if you notice, the support schemes that are in the handout are also targeted at based on feedback and based on the ground concerns. We have come up with various schemes to look after, care for, and even engage the regulators as well as different agencies to make sure the rights, interests, and the welfare of freelancers in these various spaces are looked after.
Sure. Let's look at this scenario. So this is a scenario where Jasmine, the freelancer, is teaching yoga, but previously she was teaching yoga at, of course, a school where there's a physical premise. But because of COVID-19, now it is done online. And when they were doing it at the school would ask the students to sign a waiver of liability or indemnity forms. Now that it is done online, Francis, can you share some thoughts about how Jasmine can protect herself, given that these forms are no longer being signed when it's a virtual session?
Okay, thanks, Liansheng. First, let's take a step back. I like what Patrick was sharing about the, collectivism and the banding together. A lot of you freelancers out there, you're probably feeling very alone, that there is an imbalance because a company that you're negotiating with is this big giant and you're just one small voice. So you feel, that what's the point of knowing my legal rights? I'm outclassed. I can't bargain enough. And so that's where we want you to know that you are not alone, that there are like-minded people out there band together. Okay, so on to Jasmine. As she pivots from physical classes to online, for those of you who are paying attention, if you had noticed what Liansheng was doing at the start of this session, he was talking about housekeeping rules. Now, Jasmine can borrow some of that idea. It's important, for example, to have a slide at the beginning of her presentation of her yoga demonstration and classes that has all these disclaimers that says you are proceeding at your own risk. By continuing, you are warranting that you are in good health, all right? And then something like, have you had enough water and rest the night before? And another thing that comes easily to mind would be, if you are experiencing pain or breathlessness, please stop, go at your own pace. You can have this in a slide and you put it at the start of your program. And then another good thing that Jasmine can do is at each segment of her exercise, she can, in the usual bouncy way that these yoga people do it, and they say things like, hey, how are you feeling now? If you're feeling breathless or if you can't keep up, it's okay. You can go at your own pace. Little things like that to check would be important, because it shows that you are paying attention to the needs of your people. And Patrick had this interesting idea. You know, he said, if technology allows, you can have this little ticker tape that goes, you know, like CNN News, that just keeps repeating these disclaimers at the bottom of your video. All right, so these are some practical tips that you can adopt. But if all else fails and somehow somebody gets a pulled muscle and wants to sue you, all right, the idea here is two ideas. They are likely to sue you under something called the tort of negligence, saying that you owe them a duty of care, that somehow you've fallen below that standard and therefore they are coming after you. This is where these tips that we have given you about your video and about these checks that you're doing, you know, on the way as your program is running, these would be useful evidence that you have done your best to ensure safety. The other aspect links to what Patrick was talking about, insurance, all right? It will be useful to consider liability insurance, third-party liability, protection of your own safety, you know, and, you know, liability to others as well. So don't overlook this cheap and easy way, you know, that you can pass on the risk to another party rather than being sued in your personal capacity with no protection, and then you're finding that all your you know, effort has gone and been wasted. All right, okay, so practical tips. Patrick, anything to add?
Yeah, thanks. I think, Francis, you covered most of it, but I thought you know, if you are providing all those opening slides and ticker tapes to warn, and of course your actual verbal, you know, sound of warning to your participants or whoever that's watching you on air. Also a good reminder to record your sessions. I know many of our instructors do it via Zoom and other platforms. Of course, some do it on YouTube Live and others. So actually good to, as a practice, to take down or record your sessions, put it in a file, put it in a thumb drive somewhere, just in case, you know, someone alleges that there wasn't any notice given to us. And I thought that helps in what Francis alluded to as evidence to show you have done your due diligence. And as for some of you who are asking about all these various clauses, I didn't see a scan last night. Yeah, looking at some of these exercise programs. Yeah. Looking at Pilates, yeah, most of these videos these days, especially on YouTube, they have that disclaimer. So if you need to you need some templates, please take professional legal advice. At the same time, also you can use those as references on how to get, well, some basic information across.
Thanks, Patrick. Francis touched on a point which we also have a query from one of the attendees, which is relating to the concept of insurance. We have an attendee who says, you know, he's a leadership and executive coach. He's been asked about proof of professional indemnity. Are there any organizations or insurers, Patrick, in your work with NTUC, are there insurance programs that actually go out to help self-employed persons?
Yeah, I won't advertise for any particular insurance company, but there are a whole plethora of insurance companies, underwriters, brokers, insurance brokers that do, including for lawyers. I know Francis and Liansheng will know as well. So I mean, it's there are available companies doing this at varying costs, looking at the extent of your work, your occupation, and you know, how you charge, and etc., and the nature of your advice or service given. So do check it out. It's available. If you do a quick search on the web, you should be able to see an extensive list of insurers and underwriters and brokers doing such professional indemnity. I'm aware because I said I did a bit of research on getting up on this. There are actually available ones locally in Singapore as well.
And I think in the resources, we also have some information about insurance schemes for self-employed persons as well. So the attendees who are listening to our webinar, please do download the handouts that we have uploaded into the handout pane as well.
Yeah, just as a short advert, so in the handouts we have provided two very useful references. One is the Pocket series, which is done by this LawWorks series. It's a LawWorks ebook on I Want to Be a Freelancer. We are in the process of updating it, but otherwise the checklist as well as the FAQs in there are very, very useful. It's a very, very quick layman guide. 5 minutes, you can probably read it front to back. So it's a good reference guide. The other one is a very, very nice piece done by also PBSO in partnership with many of them, including Liansheng, yeah, the Advocates for the Arts, where we have a particular focus. That one is a bit more thicker, more substantive. You can't finish it front to back in 5 minutes. Probably take a while, but very useful also for those in the creative sector to look after and protect your interests. So these two are available for free download as you sign up for this webinar. It's on the pull-down menu under handouts.
Thank you. Okay, so we move on to the next scenario. Yeah. Okay. The next scenario deals with, of course, many freelancers have been coming forth to say, look, they're now doing, like what Patrick says, teaching classes over Zoom. They're doing online content. So there's a query. You know, they have also received contracts in their service negotiations with the vendors, where the vendors would say, hey, look, actually the intellectual property that that exists in the work you do with us, whether it be it through a virtual class or sharing session, etc., they want to own the copyright or they want to own the intellectual property. It is quite a common problem. And this freelancer, in our case, Jasmine, she feels uncomfortable about it because right now, with the prevalence of online teaching, she reuses her materials for all the talks she gives. So Francis, let's go to the legal thing first. What should Jasmine do when she's faced with such a contract?
Okay, right. Now, the general idea is that the author or creator of the work is also the owner. So where do we have this idea that somehow employer owns it? All right, because the employer-employee relationship is an exception to this rule. Generally speaking, the employer, the person you work for, is the one that owns all the things that are created by you in the course of your employment. But hey, you're a freelancer. The employment rules don't apply to you. So the idea here is you are the author, you are also the owner. So what's important for you is to understand first the value that you have because you are the person creating this work. The second thing is, what do you do with that value? Now, there are two things that you can do with that value. The first is you can either assign or transfer it out. That means you are going to give all the rights away to either this third party that you are working for or who has contracted you. If you are going to do that, you are no longer the owner of the copyright and you can't use these works in the future. Have you factored that into your pricing? All right. Now, on the other hand, you are the author. You could license out the right to use your material. And this would be a talking or negotiating point with the person who is contracting with you. They can't take away your ownership of your material unless, of course, it was in there and you didn't read your contract and you signed away your rights. Okay? You've only yourself to blame. But otherwise, knowing the value, you may want to negotiate them and say, you know what? I am the creator and owner of these works. I'm going to reuse this in other material, but I give you a license, permission to use my work free of charge for as long as you are using it for your organization, for your training or whatever. Negotiation. Now, again, if you feel outclassed because you are only one voice, seriously think about the collectivism that Patrick was referring to and try and see if you can band together with other like-minded people to lobby for a certain position. All right. Anyway, there are changes coming to the copyright laws. Stay tuned. One of the exciting things is this right of authorship. You know, is so that if you if people use your material, they have to acknowledge you as the creator. All right, but that's the legal side. Patrick, over to you for any practical tips.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, a few things that Francis alluded to, which I want to reiterate, is know the value of your work, and of course, sometimes it's easier said than done, because many of our freelancers may be in a weaker bargaining position. You may be starting that particular trade or occupation or craft. You may be just starting out. You may not be a very well-known creator. So you have a different level of bargaining chips. So very, very important to find out the value or put a value to yourself, your work, your creation. At the same time, also be mindful of what Francis mentioned earlier. Whether you are willing to swear your rights away for to the buyer of your particular work or service. Very, very important. So look out for the terms. I think we can't emphasize more in whatever trade. It's not just in the creative trade, but see what you're signing off on the dotted line, signing off your rights away. Very, very important. And as Francis alluded to earlier as well, that there are upcoming changes to the Copyright Act. It was just introduced in Parliament last Tuesday, first reading. Will be read again in September, and then possibly passed by law by the end of the year. So just take note of those. We will probably be adding some of these changes, the information to the Pocket series. So we're probably coming up an updated version for you to refer to. But otherwise, if you want to double click on some of these information we just shared about a bit more chim areas of intellectual property, do refer to the Advocates for the Arts chapter on copyright, and you will be able to get some a bit more detail. Again, look out for what you're signing. We can't emphasize more the importance of collectivism, because from that, banding together, working with industry peers, you can actually get a good sense on what the market is like, what the market is charging, how you should charge. You can even, if you're really just starting out in the trade or craft, you can even find mentors in those groupings.
That's right.
So that those who are well in the trade for long enough will tell you, the ins and outs and what to look out for, especially when you are going for your first few jobs or gigs, and really clueless about how to price your service.
Yeah, Francis, I'm actually interested in the concept of licensing, because you said, for the freelancer, one way of saying is I can license the work that I'm doing for free, and then you can use my work within your organization. I wanted to know whether there are any tips when it comes to talking about licensing. Do we talk about the length of time that the work can be used? Do we talk about geography, or what? Are there elements that freelancers can think of when they're thinking about licensing with their vendors?
Okay. The idea here is you've got that idea, and now the question is, how do we craft it and limit it? Okay. Think in terms of organization. All right. You are contracting with this party. Maybe you want to limit the license or permission you're giving just to this organization. Then you think in terms of activity. All right. What activity does this organization want to use it for? Is it in-house training? Is it for sharing with a third-party vendor? All these considerations may have different impact on your pricing and different impact on what you want to give away. All right. Or you may even price it. It not necessarily has to be a free license. It can be a paid license. And then that talks about timing. All right. Maybe you want to have them pay for this license at X price for 12 months, after which the right lapses. Okay, so play around with some of these variables. It will help you to shape and craft the license that you are carving out of your copyright ownership. Hope that answers it, Liansheng.
Yes, I think that's very useful to think about licensing concepts. for intellectual property? Because I do hear of many freelancers coming up to me, whether they are photographers, when their photographs are being sold to agencies, or even tutors, freelance tutors. Their materials are being circulated among the students when they're teaching tuition, etc. And they always come and ask me, how do I then structure, the documents or the things that I'm doing or the work that I've sold or my services that I'm selling to the vendors.
The tip is, band together in the collectivism, as Patrick says, maybe get a mentor who will show you the ropes, and the other thing is, seek the appropriate legal advice. After all, you are the business owner, you take responsibility for it.
Thank you. Okay, I will move on to the next scenario. It's a bit longer, but it's also quite relevant, which has been happening at times because of the changing COVID-19 situation. So this is a situation where Jasmine, she freelances as a performer, and then of course she has been engaged to perform at a show for a limited audience. However, due to recent changes, there were new measures implemented by the government. Then the event organizers told Jasmine, hey, this event is going to be postponed indefinitely, and that because you have not performed any work, you're not going to be paid. Okay, so we start with Francis, you again, in terms of legal rights. How can Jasmine protect herself in such a situation? What are the things she should take note of when she's negotiating contracts in such a volatile situation?
Okay, I think the first point to drive home to everyone here is COVID-19 is no longer an unexpected event. All right. We hear a lot of contracting parties, especially bigger companies, misusing the terms force majeure or unforeseen event and saying that therefore they are excused from performing their contractual rights. Wrong. Okay. It may have caught us by surprise last year, but now when you are negotiating your contract, you owe it to yourself to factor in the impact of COVID delays. All right, so how do you go about that? If you are contracted either for an event or a task or a certain job, consider the time frame in which you are going to do it. Let's say it has to be performed by X date, but then perhaps provide for a contingency where X date doesn't happen. All right, so how many postponements do you want to allow? 1, 2, it can't be that the program is left indefinitely and you're left hanging. All right, so consider limiting it to maybe 1 or 2 postponements. Then your payment terms will have to be far more detailed. All right, gone are the days when I perform and I get paid. All right, now you need to consider what is your, let's say, rehearsal cost? What is the cost of mobilization? Factor these in and maybe come up with a schedule and a date by which they are performed. So, for example, if, let's say, the performance was in 2 weeks' time, but it now got cancelled, but it clearly shows in your contract that you have undertaken all these activities by certain dates in preparation for that program, you could claim these costs from the other party, if that is the agreement. All right, or you could factor it into a cancellation policy, or you could take a deposit. All right, and these are various ways that you can protect yourself in this period of uncertainty. But I reiterate the point, COVID is no longer an excuse not to be paid or to be caught by surprise. Okay, so you need to be prepared and be responsible.
Patrick, what about you? Have you been, Patrick, have you been hearing any developments in the freelancer industry or circuit, where maybe people are implementing COVID-19 clauses? Is there such a practice nowadays?
I think
do that?
Yes. I think quite a number of the big organizations that are procuring services from gig workers, freelancers, are starting to do this. But I think it's still not very prevalent yet in Singapore. I don't know whether it's good or bad, but I think today's advice, as shared by Francis, is very, very good for every one of you who may be providing a service, to anyone who's procuring the service or your craft you're doing. To factor that in, I think very, very important. I think if everything, the problem now you're dealing is not that people are using that as an excuse, but many people are unaware that you can actually provide for such things, and so if you as a freelancer, now that you have this new information, when you sit down with the buyer of your services, I think you will value add to them as well. And also makes things easier if a new advisory comes out, new restrictions come up, or new delays come up, or new travel restrictions come up that may require you to delay in the delivery of your service, or delay in your buyer's organizing of his or her event. So I think it's good for you to proactively. So don't wait until the buyer tells you, I want this and that. You can actually proactively, discuss, negotiate this, and build this in, so that you come prepared to the table, especially when you are providing some of your services. So I strongly recommend everyone, many of the freelancers who are tuning into this, as you engage your buyer of your service, to proactively factor this in, so that no one is caught by surprise, and things don't get acrimonious and sour later on.
And that brings me to the next point. If things do get acrimonious and sour, there's a question about mediation. Is there something that the freelancers can engage if things are not going well for them?
Yeah, I know Francis will have a lot to say. He's an expert in this space, and also a pro bono mediator of sorts. But I just wanted to just share that the labor movement and tripartite partners actually set up the Tripartite Alliance for Disputes Management. And they have since 2 years ago opened up to provide voluntary mediation services for freelancers. So if you do get into a dispute, again, this voluntary mediation services means both parties must agree, consent, and volunteer to enter into this mediation. So that's one service which TADM, or Tripartite Alliance for Disputes Management, provides in short. So that's a service that you can access to, whether you're a union member, you're not a union member, and as well as in various spaces. Of course, if you belong to one of those associations, that's been listed. It's quite a long list, so that's why we have provided the handouts. If you belong to any of those associations, we have provided the handles, i.e. the contact numbers, the emails. So if you do fall into any of those associations, and if you are a member, you can actually access to a team of my colleagues who will support you and walk the journey with you if you get into a dispute or you need some advice, even to how to navigate through TADAM and other alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. But then I'll just hand it back to Francis to share with you the many things that he's doing on this space in mediation.
Thanks, Patrick. The focus is actually on the freelancers today, and I think I cannot emphasize more the work that Patrick and his team are doing, okay? Because think of it this way, when things go wrong, you want a cost-effective dispute resolution mechanism, and you want really to just solve the problem and move on. And I think, TADAM provides you with that platform. Two other platforms that you can look for are the Law Society Mediation Scheme. We'll be providing you with the links. And the other one is the Small Claims Tribunal. If mediation doesn't solve and you have to go and fight, but that presupposes you have a written contract and your contract terms are clear, all right? Then the Small Claims Tribunal is where you can go to assert your rights. Back to you, Liansheng.
Yes. We have a question from one of the attendees. relating to unfair practices in relation to contracts or in terms of industry practice. What the attendee's question is there anywhere where we can report unfair practices? And also for the tripartite fair employment practices guidelines, would they be applicable to freelancers as well?
Patrick,
Maybe
sounds like something for you.
Yeah. Yes. So as I alluded to, there are two channels. Firstly, of course, if you belong to one of those groupings or associations that we have set up and you're a member, please let us know. Even if you're not a member, do sound us out. If you have any feedback on any buyer, an unconscionable buyer of your services, and if you do face some unfair, contract terms, for example. So that's one platform. The Tripartite Alliance for Fair and Progressive Employment Practices. So far, the main focus is still on in employment relationships. So many of the standards are actually for employment relationships. However, in the last couple of years, because of the nature of the growth of the freelance space, we've actually come out two specific pieces of tripartite standards under this TAFAP or TAFAP, Tripartite Alliance for Fair and Progressive Employment Practices. We actually came up with promulgated two pieces of tripartite standards, one for the creative sector and one for the freelance space, to give you to basically signal to the buyer of your services and the services that you provide to look out and to comply with the best practices where possible. So that's one thing that we've been doing, and we have been evangelizing, educating many of the buyers. And for a start, we have gotten the public sector, one of the big buyers of services, to lead the way and put the money where the mouth is. So they are supposed to comply with the tripartite standards. So if you do come across or you need to whistleblow, do let us know through our various channels, even to TAFAP as well.
I also learned
here, Liansheng, let me just jump in here to basically add to those points. Three things. The first thing is, if you're alluding to contract and unfair contract terms, it means that you are aware of your contract rights. All right, I think that is really important. The second thing is then the unfairness of the bargaining power. This again goes back to the point about the collectivism, all right, and the need for you all freelancers to band together, because you must understand that the companies or the environment, they still are operating in an employment mindset. All right, they haven't really adjusted to the gig economy. So in a sense, they are learning along the way. All right, but let me just steer this slightly towards the food delivery, for example, because I can imagine food delivery drivers saying, we're at the bottom of the food chain, we got very little bargaining power. Wow, what's the point of you talking about contract, or for that matter, food delivery? The first thing we need to emphasize is read your contract. Read your contract to understand what it is you must do, what it is the equipment that you have to provide or the company is providing, and what are the deductions that are being made from the amounts that are being paid to you. From here, you would then be able to ascertain what your rights are. And then if you feel that there's something unfair about it, go to this collectivism that Patrick has been talking about and raise it, discuss it, and maybe as a voice try to influence the industry. All right. The other thing is you have to look out within, not just your contract, look out for your own health and safety, because the contract is going to say you're going to do a lot of things, but if you don't take care of your own safety, you can't perform the contract. All right. So safety has two aspects. You have to take care of the equipment that you are using in the services, and you also have to make sure that your equipment doesn't harm other people. All right, so this ties back to the concept of insurance, both for your own personal safety and the liability of others. And if you need help, again, go and consult NTUC for the collectivism, see what programs they have that are able to help you in this insurance space. Okay, I can't emphasize it enough. The weaker you feel that you are as a freelancer, collectivism is important for you. Thank you, Liansheng. Back to you.
Actually, collectivism is also what I wanted to talk about as well, because even on the ground, I'm quite in tune with the arts community. And one of the recent developments was when a ground-up group basically raised to National Arts Council about some of the terms in the funding terms and conditions. And there were some changes made after these things were surfaced to NAC. After this freelancers came together and wrote a letter and said, hey, you know, there are certain things that you should take note of when it comes to IP. And IP is all the more important for creatives because that is really their work product and their livelihood. And that was a success story. So I thought the collectivism, I can't emphasize that enough.
Yes.
So I think
Liansheng just, I'm aware of that, and I think that's one example of a success story of collectivism and so-called unity is strength. That's why, in fact, we in the labor movement we have formed several of these associations and groups for this very reason, because we see some blind spots, we see some lacunas, and we see many of them as individuals unable to have a very strong bargaining chip. So we're trying to bring people together. So example, we started many years ago. Prior to all these new platforms were the taxi associations, where taxi hirers had different challenges. For example, like only allowing to be allowed to only to park at taxi bays, for example. I mean, these were issues that we had to engage Land Transport Authority and many others and try to move the. And I think I have a very passionate experience 2 years ago when a private hire vehicle driver came to see me and shared about his challenge. What his challenge then was, this 2 years ago, prior to the law change, was that because he was working very, very hard, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. I mean, he earned quite a decent income for that whole year, whole financial year, or whole taxable year. And he came up to quite high in the tax bracket. And then being single, being living alone, and not much of a release and deductions minus his personal tax reliefs, had to pay quite a significant amount of tax. Yeah. Then we realized that it was not just him. There were quite a few people in the private hire vehicle space having to, if they work particularly hard, went up to the higher end of the tax bracket and end up paying quite a lot in tax. So then again, the same scenario in the taxi space is that the taxi drivers actually could use their hiring of the hiring fees or the rental fees of the taxis from the taxi companies as an employment expense under the Income Tax Act. So what we did was we lobbied, the National Private Hire Vehicle Association lobbied, and finally, after almost a year or so, the law was changed, and I think effective last year, was that now private hire vehicle drivers can actually claim the rental vehicle charges as employment expense, and therefore now fall below the tax bracket. So this is one example of collectivism and how we come together. And for some of you, I know, who are doing delivery and tuning in, and it's going to be peak hour in shortly, is that please read the fine print. I know many of you enter into the arrangement, as what Francis say. Just signing on a dotted line, and particularly so for all these food delivery platforms. You're just looking at the microsite and maybe too tired or too lazy to again scroll down word for word, and go to, you just go to the final checkbox or lozenges and just tick, I've read the terms and conditions, and that's it. Please don't do that. Please read, because some of the rights and privileges and insurance and other benefits only kick in after a period of time, or after you hit some KPIs, or key performance indicators, or some sales target or delivery targets. So please look out for what is in that contract carefully. Not sure, not to worry. If you are in the food delivery, we have the Food Delivery Champion Association. Be part of it. We are there to support you if you are not so sure, because we work quite closely with the regulators as well as some of these platform companies, so that we can feedback to them and look after your interests and rights.
Thank you. Those are very useful information to know. I think it will help the food delivery. I think the food delivery service providers are a growing group of freelancers in Singapore. So that's why some of our content today is also geared towards that, because we are trying to move with the times. Freelancers come in many shapes and forms nowadays as well. Yeah. Okay. I move on to the last scenario. Since we have about half an hour left, because I want to cater some time for the Q&A session as well. There are quite a number of questions coming in. The last scenario deals with some recent developments that I have been seeing as well, and I think NTUC has seen through the freelancers' feedback and sharing sessions as well, which is the situation of non-disclosure agreements. In recent times, many freelancers have come across situations where they've been asked to sign non-disclosure agreements for work that they have been asked to do. Sometimes the non-disclosure agreements come in halfway, when they're about to finish the product or halfway through working on the product. Of course, Jasmine in this situation has to consider, does she want to sign or does she not want to sign the NDA? And would she get paid then for the work done if she does not sign the NDA? Let's go to the basics first. Francis, why don't you share with us what exactly is a non-disclosure agreement?
Okay, a non-disclosure agreement, or an NDA, is essentially an agreement between the parties to keep sensitive information confidential. Okay, there are various terms used in the law, trade secrets and confidential information, but the idea is the parties are agreeing to keep this sensitive information away from the public domain. Okay, now this is a contractual obligation, which therefore means that it should be made known to you as a freelancer at the time of contracting. All right, after you signed your contract on the dotted line, that is your freelancing arrangement with your buyer. If they halfway through ask you to sign another NDA agreement, or worse still, try to make it contingent on you getting paid, you can say no, because it is not part of your original contract. All right, but then if as a matter of goodwill you don't want to be too difficult, I advise you to read what the NDA says. All right, because we have had certain unscrupulous practices where you call it a non-disclosure agreement, which strictly deals with just confidentiality, but inbuilt into this agreement are restraint of trade, non-competition clauses, which you go and sign blindly at your own peril. Okay, so strictly speaking, additional terms that come after your contract, you can say no, because they're not part of the original contract. If you are signing an NDA, read it, and then you can still negotiate on the scope. All right, what is the sensitive information that you are supposed to be covering? Maybe they don't want their pricing, they don't want their procedures to be made known to third parties. Sure, that's fair, but it should not also then restrict you in your rights and in what you can or cannot do. So that's where you draw the line. But again, it comes down to negotiating power. All right, and again, it comes back to perhaps highlight this to NTUC, use the collectivism power, and maybe lobby for change. Thanks, Yangshen.
Patrick, what are the usual situations where someone will be asked to sign an NDA?
Yeah, we have come across situations. For example, you're pitching for a job. So even when you're pitching for a job and giving the concepts and ideas, Sometimes even before the start of the contract, you may be required to sign an NDA, for example, so that you know that we are pitching for this job, we are doing this, we are trying to get some agencies or some creatives to do a particular gig for us and some contract, but we want to keep it low so that the big bang does not get leaked up into the industry or to other parts. So that may be one scenario prior to you stepping into the job. So you have to be very clear, read the terms of the NDA, like what Francis said. So the NDA may occur during the contract, in the midst of the contract, or even prior to the contract when you are pitching for the job. For example, you go to a tender briefing or quotation briefing and stuff like that. So they may require to do that. Likewise, also there may be scenarios where they don't want you, if you you already have provided the service, to tell and augment your CV to say that you have provided service to this company, XYZ company, because it could be a government organization, it could be something pretty hush-hush, or likewise also could be a big multinational listed company, and they don't want you to so-called borrow their brand to basically advertise your services. So that may be a scenario. So you have to decide for yourself, especially when you undertake that job, whether it's worth doing it and whether it's worth or if you feel strongly you want to use it as in your CV subsequently when you are pitching for other jobs. I think it's good as a good practice, as a good industry practice, and as well as a good client buyer freelancer relationship to actually inform the other party that you will be using his or her company name to pitch for other jobs. Yeah.
Hey, Liansheng, let me just jump in here and speak in favor of NDAs. All right. You as a freelancer can actually use the NDA to your advantage. So for example, if you have a creative idea that you are quoting or pitching to this buyer, but it is still at the pre-contract stage or in the early stages, you're not yet appointed. But you don't want them to just take your idea and then go to the next vendor and say, hey, can you do this idea for me? Okay, you as a freelancer could use an NDA to make sure they don't take your idea and they keep your sensitive information private. Okay, so consider this around. It's not necessarily a bad thing if you know how to use the NDA to your advantage. Back to you, Liansheng.
Yeah, so from what I'm hearing, it seems that the freelancer should communicate with the service buyer as to the purpose of the NDA, as to the scope, why, the reasons, and then consider for himself or herself whether it's useful for an NDA to be present for themselves as well. Yeah, I hear a lot of cases involving NDAs. Even when sometimes I work as a playwright and I've been approached by certain organizations, they say, hey, this is supposed to happen in 2 years' time, but we don't want you to talk about it now. So then they make me sign an NDA as well. So there are usual situations, which is why I thought it's good to talk about it, because I do see a prevalence of it coming in recent times as well. Yeah. Okay. We have about 20 minutes left, 25 minutes left. We moved on to the next part, which I think is very important because that deals with the resources that we have put in the handouts page. And I see from the resources, actually, I had a quick look at it, and I didn't know that there were so many organizations or associations out there for various freelancers. I mean, there is the Visual Audio Creative Content Professionals Association. Like what Patrick said, there's the Food Delivery Champions Association. There's also the National Instructors and Coaches Association, the NICA, which I came to hear about recently as well, because I heard that they've been coming together during the COVID situation when it's particularly tough for them, when they are unable to teach or do work at the schools. Patrick, would you like to share a bit about
that was
those?
great. Thanks, Liansheng. That was another one good example where we banded together and collectively negotiated with the public sector, because actually Ministry of Education was one of the biggest buyers of services from coaches, be it for many of your co-curricular activities, which were like kind of put on hold last year. Yeah, your adventure trainings, your band instructors, your soccer coaches, and many of them were left high and dry. So actually, we banded together, gave the feedback to, or in fact, negotiated and spoke to on behalf of our NICA to Ministry of Education. And if you recall last year, the Minister of Education actually came out and said, no, we will honor some of the contracts that we have already given and signed with some of these coaches. If need to, we'll pay upfront and in a graduated manner, so that their livelihoods and lives will not be affected because of a sudden cut in income totally, because of a cessation of CCAs, and even this year in a very mitigated, minimalized kind of like formats. So that's how the collectivism is alive and well. So I think it's important, especially if you belong to any of these groups that are listed in the handouts. Connect with them. We have provided you the various Facebook platforms, social media platforms, contact numbers, and email addresses to go to as well. And now that we are on the release and remedies part, earlier on, Francis and I actually covered a bit of it, and maybe I thought use this opportunity to reiterate again some of the channels. So as we are talking, we already talked about the collective efforts. So that's one way. Because unlike an employment relationship where you have the entire Employment Act and the whole plethora of labor legislation to protect you as an employee, including if you are a professional manager executive these days, as a freelancer, you only have to rely on all the other laws that are outside of the employment framework. So you don't have that basic framework to support you. So like what Francis said, both of us said in the onset, we mentioned that we are a business owner, you are sort of self-employed, you run the show literally. And I talked about health, safety, insurance, retirement adequacy, including skills upgrading. So all these are very, very important. It may not look at really as reliefs and remedies, but actually, if you can prevent the eventuality from happening, that's the best. So as I alluded to earlier, some of these practical handles are to help you to avoid going to that dispute, going to that acrimonious scenario, going to that being put in a fix. Yeah. So things that you can do proactively. Like I said, even the last 15 months, we have seen very, very high skilled, very, very highly educated professions facing challenges. You have your pilots, you have your trainers who used to do face-to-face training. Everyone had to pivot, transform, and do something else and pick up some new skills. So no one is bad. No one is bad. And every industry, if you look at SMEs alike, SMEs, for example, like in the retail space, if you just have a retail front, you're going to face big challenges. But however, you're able to pivot quick enough, or some companies that have already been traditionally on online space, they were literally riding the wave. I was sharing with Francis and Liansheng just before the start of this webinar. I know one particular small and medium enterprise business owner. Yeah, he was almost like going to be high and dry and really sinking. His SME was going to sink during the COVID period. But lo and behold, he managed to pivot to selling masks and I won't name a company, but he was selling masks and he was using a lot of social media, and that was at the start of that whole COVID process. So he tried to pivot quickly because he was doing some textile stuff in the retail front. He pivoted to doing masks and lo and behold, although he was a very localized company previously, a retail company selling textile stuff, now because of social media and everyone's eyeballs are on either the web or some form of social media, word went around, and his business now is a global business, mind you, in 12 months, because he gets orders from all over, and he's not just drowned. He did not go into the water, but now he's really floating, not yet walking on water, but floating and staying afloat. And the company is a going concern, so I'm glad to share that. And it's just one of those success cases. So it actually applies to gig workers as well as freelance workers, like each and every one of you tuning in. And because now, the world is so connected and even more smaller in that sense because of the virtual space, and the e-commerce space, and both young and not so young are all on their devices. Actually, there are a lot of opportunities for you to pivot and to deliver some of your gigs, your jobs, your services, even your instruction or your teaching, to not just within jurisdiction in Singapore, but outside of Singapore to the entire world. So make full use of those resources. I do not plan to advertise for any social media channels, but make full use of whatever social media channels you can to reach out and to amplify the work that you do. And that's one way, well, indirect relief for you, or should I say, an opportunity for freelancers to look out for. And earlier on, we talked about, I shared about Tripartite Alliance for Disputes Management. So that's one place you can go to. And the other one is, of course, to our various associations and the labor movement. So if you are part of us and one of our members, we have full-time staff powering these associations to support you in your journey. And of course, peers in the industry, so that you are not alone, and you can overcome some of these challenges. And we have even, as part of the handout, provided some of our support schemes that inside, be it financial assistance, because I know not all freelancers are sort of like PME freelancers. Yeah, some of you may be hand to mouth and may be facing a variety of challenges, or may have your work, or your business severely curtailed because of 2HA, 3HA, or even what's happening right now. So look out for those support schemes. There are, well, quite a number of schemes that we have come up with to look out for you nationally, as well as for labor movement and our members. So you can just take a quick look at those schemes. I think that's a good handout to. We have some of our colleagues have took some time to try to consolidate everything in the simple 2-3 pages. So make full use of them. And I'll just hand over to Francis to provide some of the other alternative disputes resolution mechanism. Yeah.
I want to just underscore what Patrick has said. I think the message that is going out here is that if you're a freelancer, it's important for you to understand that you are not alone. Okay, you are able to have the resources that are available through these collective schemes, but then you, as the individual business owner, need to take proactive steps to go and know your rights, to tap on these schemes, and to basically leverage on these opportunities. So we hope that all of you freelancers would relook the business that you are doing and the circumstances that you are in, and take these proactive steps. And the other thing that I want to say is, apart from taking a person to court, which was the old way of dispute resolution, seriously now consider negotiation and mediation as the alternative way, because that preserves relationships, allows you to solve matters quickly, and just get on with your life. So take all these ideas on board, and we hope that you have a good freelancing journey. Back to you, Liansheng.
I have to sell a bit of what the Law Society Pro Bono Services Office does, and it actually answers one of the questions that the attendees has posed. Because one of the attendees said, look, I hear Francis telling me to read the contractual terms, but how I'm not legally trained, how do I understand the contractual terms or the intentions or the implications behind those terms? Well, then that's when I advertise the solutions that Law Society Pro Bono Services Office have. We do, of course, for if you're in the creative industry, there is the Advocates for the Arts legal clinics. You sign up with the, you just email the Law Society Pro Bono Services Office. They will have a lawyer who can talk with you for about 20 minutes pro bono, that means free of charge, to answer the queries that you have as well. I do a lot of legal clinics as well at community centers, as well as those CDCs. So if you have queries, those are also first stops that you can attend at to answer your legal queries, and to find out actually what are your legal rights, or if you have a problem in understanding contractual terms as well. The lawyers there can help you. So it's a mixture of everything. It's a mixture of having a group there who can give you the experience, who can help you have collective power. It's about thinking how to resolve disputes in a more effective manner, like what Francis said, be it through mediation or small claims tribunal, or even negotiations. So there are really two key messages I hear from today's webinar. One is really collectivism, and two is really about communicating with your service buyer so that we get things moving. Because I think for freelancers, time is money, right? If you're able to resolve your disputes quickly, then really you're able to concentrate on the work that you can do and earn. So those are very useful tips. Thank you, Francis and Patrick. We have about 15 minutes to go. I want to go into the Q&A because I see a lot of questions flooding me, which is really the last part. But I've done a quick sort of categorizing. Maybe let's deal with the contractual questions first. There's an attendee who asked, insofar as freelancers are concerned, is there a concept of a claim for loss of opportunity cost? What do you say about that, Francis?
In a hypothetical and conceptual sense, I don't think there is such a claim of loss of opportunity. But I think what is important is that you can factor that into your pricing, all right? And that can be factored into the deposit taking or cancellation charges. And I think what we were talking about, if there was a postponement of your contract, I think you're talking about what happens. I've given up some other opportunity, but you've postponed the contract. I think what is important is, rather than leaving it to this nebulous concept of loss of opportunity, factor that into your cancellation policy and your pricing and your expenses for postponement. Back to you, Liansheng.
Okay. And Patrick, feel free to jump in if sorry, we're dealing with the more legal things here.
In fact, Liansheng, I know one of the questions which I saw that there was one question on is there a collective group for independent trainers, facilitators conducting life skills, soft skills workshops? So that's the quick answer, that yes, there is. Yeah, it's a part of our adult educators chapter within the Education Services Union. So we have started this quite a number of years already. So if you need to, their web address is www.esu.org.sg. Again, Education Services Union, esu.org.sg. Do touch base with them, because we do have a large group of adult educators or trainers or soft skill trainers who are part of this chapter within the Education Services Union.
Okay. There is also a query in terms of international contracts. So a freelancer asks, if I'm contracting with a vendor overseas, are there any guidelines or tips that you can provide for freelancers in such a situation? And the second question was, what happens if there's a dispute for this kind of contracts?
Wow. Okay, if you're dealing across borders internationally, I think I would leave you with 3 tips. Okay, make sure that everything is spelled out in your contract. In other words, all the more your contract terms have to be very clear and express. The other aspect is payment. Protect yourself by getting payment either in the form of a deposit or payment in stages. Don't just do all the services and then hope to be paid. All right? Because when it comes to dispute resolution, the question is twofold. The party that you're contracting with obviously is an international party. Where are your services being performed? Is it overseas or in Singapore? All right. And the other thing that you are going to be wanting to pay attention to is they have this term called the governing law of the contract. All right. And dispute resolution clauses. Most of you won't look at that. But in an international contract situation, if they say that this contract is governed by the laws of Germany and you have to sue them in the courts of Germany, I think you are at a serious disadvantage as a freelancer if there's a dispute on your contract. All right, so read through your contract terms, negotiate on the terms, and try to protect yourself as much as possible. Right, back to you, Liansheng.
Yes, and I have a question for Patrick from one of the attendees. Should freelancers register themselves as a business?
Yeah, so this is a very practical, well, in a way also borders around legal advice. So Francis, add on if you need to. So it all depends whether you're going to register a company, a business, or just operate alone and you know, pay per use kind of situation. So actually you need to weigh the pros and cons. Yeah, I mean there's lots of write-up and materials on the advantages, the disadvantages of registering as a business, i.e. a sole proprietor or partnership, vis-a-vis a company. And now you have various vehicles. I wouldn't want to go into the legal vehicles that you can use. There's a whole plethora of them, but essentially you have to decide for yourself because there will be important things like, you know, contractual obligations, rights under specific legislation, for example, like the Companies Act, etc., and also tax considerations. And of course, this is not a Companies Act or company law like webinar, but essentially some of the rights and duties and liabilities will come in. So do think carefully. I think some of these materials and information are available. Could well be in some of our pocket series, as well as through various platforms, through PBSO as well as the Law Society. So I think do check them out to then make a good judgment assessment for yourself on how you treat or want to treat, or how you're going to, you know, manage your resources and your rights and liabilities. Yeah.
Let me jump in here. I think the practical question for you as a freelancer is to consider your scale of operation. All right. If you are just providing a service or maybe a creative, you know, kind of function, then you could very well perform it as an individual. All right. But if you are going to scale up, if you're going to want to go international, maybe you might want to corporatize. But as Patrick said, that brings in a whole lot of other regulations into play, and also costs. So I think if you're a freelancer and you're talking about should I register a business, then you're talking about scale. So consider that for yourself and make your own judgment.
In the Advocates for the Arts book as well, which is one of the handouts, there actually is a chapter dedicated to that, because I think it's a perennial concern for freelancers. When do they get more forms as they work through the years? I mean, even in my own experience, some freelancers have told me when I'm younger, I don't see a need to formalize myself, so I'm just a contractor providing services. But as I'm growing older, I want to have a company so that, you know, I pay myself a salary, I contribute to my CPF. It allows me to talk to bigger service buyers, etc. So it all depends on what the situation is sometimes, I think, for the freelancers as well. Yeah,
I just want to
have a
Liansheng, don't mind. I just want to add in, because we have provided quite a bit of a handouts. So I just want to cover two of those handouts which I've not alluded to yet. Firstly, of course, our NTUC membership application form. We talked about collectivism, so that you can access it. There's a virtual version as well, or e-version as well, in our website at www.ntuc.org.sg. And then you can be connected to all the list of associations which I've provided as a separate handout. But there's also another handout, actually from the CPF board, called the Contribute as You Earn scheme. Yeah, it's a pilot scheme rolled out by Ministry of Manpower under the auspices of Central Provident Fund Board, CPF board, to help and support freelancers. So, well, it's sort of a pilot scheme to support freelancers in preparing, or, well, to fill up your CPF, your MediSave, and of course to encourage you to prepare for a retirement, to have retirement adequacy in short, as I alluded to at the start of today's session. So do find out more details on that. It's a pilot scheme. Particularly, it's not a lot of co-contribution from the government, but well, it's a token amount, but a good start for you to prepare yourselves to prepare for the future. So I thought that's a good handout for you to refer to. Particularly, many of you, I know, for example, like doing food delivery as well as doing prior hire vehicle driving. I think this is a good scheme to embark on as a start. As you know, our CPF accounts attract a very, very high interest. There's a whole big permutation on it. I will not go into the exact details, but otherwise a minimum of 2.5% all the way up to 4, 5, or even 6%, depending on which account it is, and the first 60,000 or the next $60,000 or subsequently. So I think all these details you can actually tap on through the CPF website or the app. Yeah.
Actually, my friends came to talk to me about it. I think it was implemented about two or 3 years ago. And if I'm not wrong, most public institutions, they are starting to implement that. So for freelancers who have been teaching at school, a part of their remuneration will be paid towards their CPF MediSave portion, because I think sometimes we can't expect many things, and then there might be injury, maybe health-related issues, and the MediSave does help some of the freelancers quite a bit. The life is always uncertain, that's what I say. Okay, we have about 4 minutes left. I do want to finish one last question, because this is a question I keep seeing in a lot of the webinars or the seminars that I attend, which is of course the issue about not having a contract, and whether things like WhatsApp would constitute evidence or proof of fact that there is a contract. Francis, short answer, what do you say about that?
Okay, in the absence of a nicely written contract, WhatsApp, emails, WeChat can provide alternative evidence, all right, as to what were the terms that have been agreed. But then again, I always say, why do you want to leave something as important as maybe a 6-month project that you're going to do and earn X amount of dollars to WeChats and emails? Surely this is something that is important enough for you to have properly documented, properly discussed, and with the other party. And what I do notice is that very often these WeChats and emails and WhatsApps are in what I call short form. It is just talking about, I'm going to do this at this price, and what is my start date. All right. As you have heard through this webinar, there are a whole host of other things that can be covered in the contract. Like, what do you do with postponements? What do you do to protect yourself from NDAs and confidentiality and other contract terms? These may not necessarily have been addressed in your WhatsApp and your emails, and you're leaving too many things to uncertainty and chance. So I would encourage you, while these WhatsApp and emails can be evidence of what was agreed, nothing beats having a written contract, especially in the case of the freelancing industry.
Yeah,
Back to you, Liansheng.
I just want to chime into what Francis just alluded to, the need for a contract, because sort of a public service announcement. Yeah, I hear from the police as well. There are now scam jobs that people use WhatsApp, messaging, and all sorts, even emails to get you to provide your service, and they are actually scam jobs. So be extra careful. Be extra careful. Particularly, I'm concerned about for freelancers in particular because, like I said, sometimes it may be just to provide a gig for certain time, certain period, certain day, and then they promise to pay you, and then there you go. After you provide that particular assistance service or that call, and then that's it, you know, you don't hear from that person anymore. And that number is not existent, and you do a check. So do watch out. The police are getting scam alerts as well on scam jobs and scam assignments for you to, like, you know, a good example of one which I gotten to my WhatsApp from the police as an alert is, you know, some of these that tell you, you know, just make 10 calls, you get paid $500 and things like that, you know. So be extra careful. Yeah, you may be making a call, but you may not be paid at the end of the day. So just look out for it. So I just want to, you know, lend weight to the fact that what Francis mentioned. If it's serious enough, and if they really want to put you on a real, or they really want to engage your services, definitely there's some form of formal contract to carry out.
Thank you. And on that public service announcement, I have to bring the Q&A to an end. For the attendees, I do hope that you all have found our webinar on freelancing in the new normal useful. Please do download the handout, because once this webinar session closes, you can't click the link and download anymore. But I believe the Law Society Pro Bono Services will follow up with an email on the resources that you can use while you're freelancing in this new climate. Once you leave today's webinar as well, there will also be a survey sent to you. Please help us fill in so that we can know how to better improve our future sessions. With that, thank you very much, Patrick and Francis, for joining us this morning. And on behalf of the Law Society Pro Bono Services, thank you to the attendees, the audience, for joining us as well just before lunchtime. And hope everyone have a great day ahead. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Stay safe, everyone.
Yeah, take care.